So today we're going to be doing some pansies in ink and watercolor. So I already have the drawing of my pansies done, which, you don't have to have them with stems. You can have, pansies going into a pot. They could be growing in a garden. It could just be, the pansies floating in space. That's always interesting. So I already have them drawn out. With pansies, the weird thing about them is they actually have 5 petals. It's hard to see sometimes because these two back here tend to be really, really close to each other. But if you look at kind of the reference picture and look really close, you can see this little line right here, and that separates these 2 petals. So you want them to be nice and big, nice and spaced out. I kind of drew them petal by petal rather than starting with a big shape, just because these are basically just giant petals. There's not a lot of other shapes going on. So once you have your drawing done, then what I would do is start just very lightly outlining them. And when you outline them, pansy petals tend to have a little bit of wave to them. So you want to make sure that you kind of have a little bit of a wave when you're outlining. And I don't mean wave like wave. I'm just saying doing like small, little indentations in it. You want to have some smooth areas and some kind of wavy areas on your little pansies. I'm going to outline the little center. And it's up to you if you want to outline, these little dark sections. That's kind of up to you. You could just fill those in with shading, or you could actually outline the shape. So, and there's not those darks on there, so I don't want to just copy and paste and do them all exactly the same. You want to always be looking at your reference. So once I have, those kind of big shapes lined up, then what I'm going to do is start coming in with my pen and start doing some fine lines. And when I'm filling this in, I really want to feel how curved, my petals are. So rather than going and doing straight lines in there, I'm going to be doing kind of hatching lines and kind of curving out. And if you get some crazy lines that aren't going the direction you want them to, that's okay. Because if you do more lines going the direction you do want them to, it'll kind of cover those a little bit. So you can do a lot of lines, you can do a little bit of lines. This one does have some little fun shadows down here. So I might want to put those in just as little lines, little hatches. And you can always add more ink later, so don't go crazy and then regret it later. But art's all about learning, so if you mess up, that's okay. But if you're worried about that, I would just do maybe very few ink lines, and then you can always come back in and add more later. So make sure you know where your lines are going to. You don't want to just flick aimlessly and then hope they land where you want them to. You have to kind of lead your lines and watch your hand to see where they're going. And then let's see, around here, it's pretty dark. So I'm going to put a little bit more shading right here, and that's going to make this area kind of pop up a little bit more. So, and I can also do some shadows, back here to make this petal look like it's on top of that one. I could just do some, maybe very little hatching back here. You don't want to go overboard. I'm going to outline my stem. So, and then for the veins, you can either draw in the veins or you can kind of shade the negative of the veins where maybe I have it dark on either side. And that'll give it the appearance of having kind of a white vein down the middle. So I'm not going to do very much ink on this one, just because the main thing is kind of the watercolor part. So next what I'm going to do is you can do your colors the exact same as the photo, or if you want, you could always kind of make it up a little bit. Like I chose pictures of pansies that are mostly purples and blues, but pansies come in all sorts of different colors. Like there's some that are yellow and purple, there are some that are pink. I just blanked on colors. But I'm going to go for kind of the traditional colors with purple. So if you don't have a purple, you can always make purple using alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. But if you have like a phthalo violet, that's a really pretty purple, or dioxazine purple is also great. So I'm using some phthalo purple. And what I'm going to be doing is kind of the wet on wet technique. So I'm going to be wetting one petal at a time. And then I'm going to be taking my purple, and rather than flicking out, I'm going to be actually going from here and flicking down. Because when you're doing petals like this, you want to make sure that your paint is going down into where you want it darkest, just because most of the time your paint is going to puddle where you drag it into. So, and I could leave that white, maybe I want a white and purple pansy, or, you know, while it's still wet, I could maybe take a little bit of blue, or if I wanted them a little pink on the edges, I could drop in some pink. But you don't want to touch this very much, because what makes these really pretty is just kind of leaving, you know, some of these little rough white edges, and, you know, having this little white. The more we touch it, the more that white's going to disappear, so I don't want to touch it very much. And so since this is wet, I'm not going to do this one. I'm going to skip over, and I'm doing kind of the same technique, wetting my petal first. And you can kind of tell how much water you have on your petal by kind of tilting your paper. If it seems like it has a giant puddle on it, that means you have too much water, or if it's too glossy. And then if you hear a lot of scritchy scratch noises, that means you have too little water. So and again, I'm going to take my purple. Oops, and I have too little purple. Sometimes if your paint is too watery, you won't be able to see it at all. So I'm just kind of dragging it down into here. And then I'm going to take some pink again. Just like that. So, and then while that's still wet, I could always, you know, do another layer of that purple. So a good way to make a really nice dark purple is you could add a little Payne's gray to your purple, because Payne's gray is kind of a really nice dark bluey gray, so it's really good for making things darker. So I'm just gonna mainly make it darker here. I don't want it everywhere. Just like that. And then while that's drying, then I could take a little bit of yellow and put a really nice light layer down here. And these things right here, we want to stay white, so try not to get too crazy and go over those. But if it happens, it happens. That's okay. And I'm going to take some sap green, very lightly do a wash on my leaves. So, and then for the rest of the petals, you would do the same thing, same technique on these. And then the ones in the back, we want to be a little bit darker. So, you know, you could do just straight purple back there. And this is a little wet still, so it might bleed, but that's okay. So, and then to get some highlights on those, if I didn't leave enough white, I can actually take a wet paintbrush and kind of lift. Just like that. And then that'll make, you know, kind of that nice kind of rippled kind of petal texture back there. And on my greens, I could get a little bit of a darker green to add on the bottom of my leaves. Or, you know, if you did enough ink, sometimes you can just leave it all just that one color. That's up to you. And then one thing to think about is when things are on top of each other, they're going to be a shadow. So later on, I would probably darken this a little bit to make it seem like this petal is on top of that petal. I would probably darken this to make it feel like this petal is on top of that. So there you have it. That's how to work on your pansies.